Welcome back to Quest for Truth. Last week, we looked at the meaninglessness of life apart from Christ, and then dug into the pointlessness of wisdom without God. Today, we are continuing on through Ecclesiastes to chapter 2, as we look at the meaninglessness of pleasure and possessions, the fate of the foolish and the wise, and the futility of labor. Let's start with verses 1 through 9. I said to myself, "Come now, I will test you with pleasure. So enjoy yourself." And behold, it too was futility. I said of laughter, "It is madness," and of pleasure, "What does it accomplish?" I explored with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine while my mind was guiding me wisely, and how to take hold of folly until I could see what good there is for the sons of men to do under the heavens the few years of their lives. I enlarged my works, I built houses for myself, I planted vineyards for myself, I made gardens and parks for myself, and I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made ponds of water for myself, from which to irrigate a forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves, and I had home-born slaves. Also, I possessed flocks and herds larger than all those who preceded me in Jerusalem. Also, I collected for myself silver and gold, and treasure of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers, and the pleasures of men, many concubines. Then I became great and increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood by me. In verse 1, Solomon lays out his next plan to test pleasure. So Solomon pursued all pleasure imaginable. He tested alcohol and folly. He built houses, vineyards, gardens, parks, and ponds. He had many slaves, flocks, and herds, wealth, singers, and concubines. But in verse 2, he gives his conclusion: laughter is madness, and pleasure accomplishes nothing. He continues in verses 10 through 11, all that my eyes desires, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all of my labor, and this was my reward for all of my labor. Thus I considered all my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity and striving after the wind, and there was no profit under the sun. Solomon held back nothing. He did all that he wanted to. He pursued everything as far as possible and came up short. The satisfaction only came from the work he put into the projects. With its completion, he found that none of the greatness that he had built will last. As he was building, he was satisfied, but when the building was done, he realized he was disillusioned. He had found purpose in the busyness, but when it faded, he realized that all he had built was worthless. This is so common, whether on purpose or not, to get lost in the meaningless busyness of life and ignore reality, to stay busy pursuing earthly things rather than eternal things. Earthly things lack value on their own. Eternal things give purpose to those things that are on earth. For example, earthly work is worthless, but the impact in other people's lives is valuable, and the use of the profits from that work can be used for God's purposes. When you are focused on heavenly things, the things you do in this earth will have a lasting, eternal impact. In verses 12 through 17, we see the fate of the foolish and the wise man. So I turned to consider wisdom, madness, and folly. For what will the man do who will come after the king except what has already been done? And I saw that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I know that one fate befalls them both. Then I said to myself, as is the fate of the fool, it will also befall me. Why have I been extremely wise? So I said to myself, this too is vanity, for there is no lasting remembrance of the wise man as with the fool, inasmuch as in the coming days all will be forgotten. And how the wise man and the fool alike die. So I hated life, for the work which had been done under the sun was grievous to me, because everything is futility and striving after the wind. The wise man and the fool both fall to the same fate of death. No matter how long their life is, they die. Wisdom may be able to extend life somewhat, but it cannot secure life forever. People have all sorts of ideas for what will make you live longer. Extreme lengths are taken to preserve oneself. I don't mean fitness plans, diets, or the like. I'm talking about things like cryogenics, for example. Cryogenics is a process by which the body is frozen after death in an attempt to preserve the body until medicine can revive them. On its face, it is of course very silly. Medicine will never be able to revive the dead. Beyond that, it completely ignores the spirit of the person. After death, the spirit leaves the body to either heaven or hell. Mankind cannot return that spirit to the body. The worldly wise man can only use his life in a pointless endeavor to attempt to extend it as long as possible. However, the godly wise man realizes that life without Christ is meaningless and uses his life to seek after God. Next, we see the futility of labor in verses 18 through 23. Thus I hated all the fruit of my labor, for which I had labored under the sun. For I must leave it to the men who will come after me, and who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool. Yet he will have control over all the fruit of my labor, for which I have labored by acting wisely under the sun. This, too, is vanity. Therefore I completely despaired of all the fruit of my labor, for which I had labored under the sun. When there is a man who has labored with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, then he gives his legacy to the one who has not labored with them. This too is vanity and a great evil. For what does a man get in all his labor and his striving with which he labors under the sun? Because all his days his task is painful and grievous. Even at night his mind does not rest. This too is vanity. In verses 12 through 23, Solomon has painted two pictures, the wise man and the fool. The wise man does as he has, built homes, gardens, parks, and vineyards. He has increased his wealth and done great things. The fool, as we also see in Proverbs, is lazy. He does not store anything, nor does he prepare for the future. We've seen in the last section, however, that both fall to the same fate of death. Solomon has stored up great wealth, yet he must leave it to someone else. That person may be a fool and waste the wealth away, and destroy all of his legacy. So essentially, Solomon is saying that no matter the size of the legacy, it will eventually be forgotten. No one can live forever, physically, and you can't do much better with your legacy. All kingdoms fall. We saw in chapter 1 that all nations eventually fall, and now we see it's the same for the individual. After exploring all life under the sun, Solomon introduces God to the stage. In verses 24 through 26. There is nothing better for a man than to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good. This also I have seen, that it is from the hand of God. For who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? For to a person who is good in his sight, he has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. While to the sinner he has given the task of gathering and collecting, so that he may give to one who is good in God's sight. This too is vanity and striving after the wind. Solomon's conclusion, then, is that only God can make life meaningful. God gives meaning to life because he gives a purpose that transcends life. This life isn't the end. However, the unbeliever hails it as such. But we know that God has a greater purpose for humanity. We have the end of the story, and we know that we will be with God, we will reign with God, we will be content with God, and we will be like God, with our flesh gone, we will desire only good things. No more death, destruction, or sadness. The fruit of the Spirit will reign. There will be love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, and faithfulness. The greatest commandment, to love God fully and others as yourself, will be kept in love. So keep on fighting, because you have all that there is, all this to look forward to, and a well done, good and faithful servant from God is just the icing on the cake. Thank you for tuning into this episode of our series in Ecclesiastes. I hope it's been both useful and encouraging to you on your walk with Christ, and I hope to see you next week when we'll look at Ecclesiastes chapter 3 here on Quest for Truth.